The following content may contain visuals that are disturbing, graphic, or sensitive in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. This material is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for all viewers. Please exercise caution while watching, and if you find such content distressing, we recommend discontinuing viewing. This disclaimer is provided to ensure awareness and to prioritize viewer well-being.
Hello and welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna, and our focus continues to be on the Israel-Hamas war. Israel has published a video of what it described as a tunnel dug by Palestinian operatives under the Gaza Strip's biggest hospital, Al-Shifa, a focus of its search and destroy mission against Hamas as the war enters the 7th week. Even though it acknowledges that it has a network of hundreds of kilometers of secret tunnels, bunkers and access shafts throughout the enclave, Hamas has denied that these are located in civilian infrastructure like hospitals. The Israeli military says its engineers have uncovered a tunnel 10 meters deep and running 55 meters to a blast-proof door, but the statement does not say what lies beyond the door. The tunnel was accessed through a shaft discovered in a shed within the Al-Shifa compound that contained munitions, according to the Israeli Defense Forces. Another security camera video shows what the Israeli military says were two foreign hostages, a Thai and a Nepalese, taken to the Al-Shifa hospital following the 7th October attacks on Israel. Israel says it's attacking terrorists and terror infrastructure in the Gaza Strip. However, many hospitals, including Al-Shifa, have come under attack in recent weeks. Almost 30 premature babies who left Al-Shifa hospital over the weekend are being taken to Egypt now. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, has said, and I quote, "We're appalled by the horrendous events of the past 48 hours in Gaza, killings of so many in schools, turned shelters amid fleeing of hundreds from Al-Shifa hospital, ongoing displacement in southern Gaza are wholly inconsistent with protection of civilians required under the international law." The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, "I'm deeply shocked that two UNRWA schools were struck in less than 24 hours in Gaza. Dozens of people, many women and children, were killed and injured as they were seeking safety on UN premises. I reaffirm that our premises are inviolable. This war is having a staggering and unacceptable number of civilian casualties. This must stop." The World Health Organization chief, Dr. Tedros, has said the World Health Organization led a very high-risk UN assessment mission to Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza. The team saw a hospital no longer able to function, no water, no food, no electricity, no fuel, medical supplies depleted. Given the deplorable situation and condition of many patients, including babies, health workers requested support to evacuate patients who cannot receive life-saving care there anymore. The current situation is unbearable and unjustifiable. Ceasefire now. Meanwhile, leaders of multiple Arab and Muslim-majority countries have gathered in Beijing, hoping to get China to pressure Israel and the United States into calling a ceasefire in Gaza.
Today, the Palestinian Authority spokesman in Ramallah said something utterly preposterous. It denied that it was Hamas that carried out the horrible massacre at the Nature Festival near Gaza. It actually accused Israel of carrying out that massacre. This is a complete reversal of truth. Abu Mazen, who in the past has denied the existence of the Holocaust, today is denying the existence of the Hamas massacre. And that's unacceptable. My goal is that the day after we destroy Hamas, any future civil administration in Gaza does not deny the massacre, does not educate its children to become terrorists, does not pay for terrorists, and does not tell its children that their ultimate goal in life is to see the destruction and dissolution of the state of Israel. That's not acceptable, and that is not the way to achieve peace.
We've also gathered more intelligence from the hospital, proving that Noah Marziano was not the only hostage taken by Hamas into Shifa hospital. I will now share concrete evidence of hostages. One from Nepal, one from Thailand, taken from Israel during the Hamas massacre on October 7th. The world must remember, Hamas is holding the elderly, men, women, children, babies, hostage. The Israel Defense Forces has a moral obligation to bring every one of our hostages home. We will not rest until we do. Hamas was hiding and murdering our hostages in Shifa Hospital. Hamas was building terror tunnels underneath Shifa Hospital. By now, the truth is clear. Hamas wages war from hospitals, wages terror from hospitals.
Pain, dread, and fear etched on the faces of children, women, and men is too much to bear. How much more violence, bloodshed, and misery will it take before people come to their senses? How many more civilians will be killed? This must stop. Humanity must come first. A ceasefire on humanitarian and human rights grounds is desperately needed now.
All right. So the global chorus for a ceasefire in Gaza is growing by the day, but Israel has so far ruled it out, saying a ceasefire at this stage would mean a win for Hamas. Hamas cannot be allowed to get away with what it did on the 7th of October. All right, so where is this war currently headed? As we said, it's entered its 7th week. Let's dissect that with our guests. Joining me on the show tonight is Itai Melchior, a researcher and advisor, Middle East and Africa Affairs, and former executive with the Israeli National Security Council. He joins us live from Haifa in Israel. And our Indian guest tonight is Ambassador Anil Trigunyat, former Indian diplomat, joining us from New Delhi. Gentlemen, welcome to Global Lens. All right, Itai Melchior, if I could start with you, let's first talk about those tunnels that have obviously generated a lot of curiosity amongst people, because from the beginning of this war, we'd been hearing about this labyrinth of underground tunnels that Hamas operates from. Now, the IDF says that they have found the first conclusive evidence that there are indeed tunnels underneath the Al-Shifa hospital. But what we don't know so far is whether Israel is in possession of conclusive evidence that also suggests that Hamas is indeed running a command and control center from there. What more can you share with us about these videos that were posted on Sunday?
Yes, so Israel knew about the tunnels, but I think that even our intelligence was surprised by the extent of the tunnels. We've seen tunnels all around, many tunnels already been dealt with. We saw even early on in some places where a bomb was dropped somewhere, suddenly you saw explosions very far away because the explosion was carried through the tunnel. So the tunnels are there. They are a problem because they also pose a threat for the soldiers as combatants. Hamas people can just pop out of a tunnel, fire an RPG or something else, and then go back underground. Now, moving around in those tunnels is very, very difficult. So, for example, in one of the main tunnels, which was found under the Al-Shifa hospital, they arrived with special equipment to a very, very strong iron door with shooting holes through it. And the big question is, how do you go through that door? How much, you can see actually the video now, to what extent do you put soldiers in danger to see what's behind the door? Because we have seen booby-trapped tunnel holes. We've seen tunnel holes even overground, which had explosive trucks parked next to them. So it's a very, very delicate mission to go underground. But we do know already, and we see the extent of the tunnels that were found under Al-Shifa, and we see the way they are protected. And we also saw the fact that the Hamas people, and we saw the videos of them running in with people into the hospital. Now, if you needed a hospital coming back into Gaza after the attack of 7 October, there are many hospitals much, much closer to the border that they would have gone to. So the fact that they were heading to Al-Shifa, and we saw the video, shows you that there's something very, very serious going on. A lot of ammunition has been found, guns, other equipment, video equipment. We see now the video of people, of kidnapped hostages being ran through the hospital and pushed, and they can run on their own feet, so they're not there because they are in danger, but because they're being ushered somewhere. And it was a well-known fact that Al-Shifa is a command and control center. It's just going to take time to unravel everything because it's dangerous to go in.
It certainly is very dangerous, and that has been known from day one, which is probably why Israel took as long as it did to launch that ground offensive in the first place. Let me go across to Ambassador Trigunia at this point. Ambassador, of course, Mr. Melchior is right in saying that this is a very delicate mission, fraught with danger. So far, we don't know what lies beyond this blast-proof door that we've been shown in that video. Israel has already lost 65 of its soldiers in the ground offensive. These tunnels could be booby-trapped. The question is, how challenging do you think this mission is likely to be for the Israeli Defense Forces that are obviously treading cautiously? And at the same time, given the videos that have now been released by IDF, do you believe that Israel is in a better or stronger position now to convince the world about its stance that, look, we always told you that there were tunnels underneath Al-Shifa hospital and Hamas has been operating from there?
Well, I think that it was very well known to everyone that there are long tunnels there, and those tunnels are supposedly the strategic strength which the Hamas thought would save them. And what we have seen in the past 46 days is that Israel has continued to mount the attacks on them and try to take them out. But in the process, what has happened is, even though these tunnels most people know about, and that they are the hideouts of the Hamas militants, but at the same time, what happens is that the people generally, globally now, are more concerned about the civilian plight when they see that, even though it's understandable that Israeli forces will go after the terrorists or the Hamas group wherever they are located, but at the same time, in the process, the kind of punishment which is being seen as collective punishment is something that has raised a lot of concern across the world, which is very clearly coming out that there are greater calls for the ceasefire. And I think that at the moment, Israel, of course, is maintaining that till such time, especially Netanyahu, that he has got his hostages back, number one. There is no point in leaving or getting into any ceasefire. So I think that the IDF will continue to mount the pressure, irrespective of whatever the international community thinks or says. But at the same time, it is also equally difficult and concerning whether the civilian casualties, which is already more than 13,000 people killed, and if you add the 1,400 or 1,200 Israelis, it becomes for nearly 15,000 people already dead in this war. So I don't know how far the conscience of the world will continue to accept it. So I think that Israel is coming under pressure, and what I have learned is that there was a Mossad chief, CIA chief, they were all in Qatar recently, and there have been discussions held, and I think there are going to be some release of the hostages, which might address the plight of this. And of course, Israel has the intelligence about this place, and as our Israeli friend said, that they were also surprised by the extent of it. They were not even aware. But I think that as far as I understand, that Israel fully knows nearly every inch of this territory. But then, of course, the surprise element in the guerrilla warfare is always there.
Right, but of course, this is the first time that they've actually launched a ground offensive into Gaza. So in some ways, it may well be unknown territory for them. But let me go back to Itai Melchior at this point. Mr. Melchior, you just heard the ambassador. He used some interesting words there. He said, the question now is how much longer the conscience of the world can accept the killings of Palestinians. And before you respond to that, I want to quickly quote to you some officials. Volker Turk, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, has said, we're appalled by the horrendous events of the past 48 hours in Gaza. Killing of so many, especially in schools turned shelters, the ongoing displacement of people in southern Gaza. This is all wholly inconsistent with protection of civilians required under the international law. The UN chief, Antonio Guterres, has said, I'm deeply shocked that 2 UN schools were struck in less than 24 hours in Gaza. Dozens of people, many women and children, were killed and injured as they sought safety. on UN premises. I reaffirm that our premises are inviolable. This war is having a staggering and unacceptable number of civilian casualties. This must stop. And the WHO chief, Dr. Tedros, has said, we carried out an assessment mission at Al-Shifa hospital. We saw a hospital that's no longer able to function. The current situation is unbearable and unjustifiable. Cease fire now. Your response?
Yeah, well, first, what we heard from World Health Organization chief was already last week, even before Israeli soldiers entered and unearthed, that yes, it is a hospital. And I think we discussed this last week. You cannot use a hospital as headquarters, or even not headquarters, as a place of hiding hostages, and the hospital staff is complicit because the people are running through the hospital with guns and with the people who have been kidnapped. And so I don't think the hospital can also really claim ignorance to the whole issue. They may be complicit, they may be forced to, but still, I'm sorry, it's sad, but Israel cannot be held accountable for the fact that Hamas chooses hospitals and schools to work from. Now, Israel is aware of the criticism, and Israel tries very hard, and people are saying, oh, but you're not trying hard enough because there's so many civilian casualties. So first of all, we don't even know who is civilian and who is not. And you say children, but many could be a 16 or 17-year-old with a gun. But that's besides the matter, because again, we're sorry for every life. That is why Israel said to people, leave Gaza City and go south. Now in Israel, maybe you don't hear this voice, there's a very strong criticism. Why are we endangering our own soldiers that have to go and fight in an area which is still full of civilians with terrorists, Hamas terrorists, hiding among them? So there's a lot of criticism here against our government for not launching a strong enough preemptive strike and not making all the civilians leave. We know that Hamas actually threatened people not to leave and even shot the people who were trying to leave because Hamas, as a strategy, needs the human shields, needs the hospitals, needs the schools, because otherwise it is just left there to fight a fair fight, what is called, in which they will lose. And they're not prepared to do that. So this has a second side also, which you have to keep in mind. Again, Israel does all in its power to not hurt any uninvolved civilians. And I really think that if we look at other battles that have gone around in the world, where Western forces, advanced countries, I'm not talking about third world or dictatorships, but advanced countries going in and using much more brute force. And I even think that if you look at it, you will see that in the last few days, the daily number of casualties has gone down because, again, civilians in masses have left through the corridors that the IDF opened for them to leave south. We know that some terrorists use this also to get away, but we are willing to live with that, again, because we want to minimize civilian casualties.
Okay, there could be another reason why this number has been static between 12,000 and 13,000, because the WHO has said repeatedly that with the healthcare structure having almost nearly collapsed, it's become virtually impossible now to collate all the data now. So we may not actually know accurately how many more people have died in the last few days. But I want to ask you this question, since you and all our other Israeli guests have maintained from the beginning, the Prime Minister has said this, that, we have been warning people to leave the north and move to the south. But I'm sure you're aware that the Israeli Defense Forces have dropped leaflets in at least 4 towns in southern Gaza, warning Palestinians to leave, to evacuate their homes in those areas and go to shelters. Therefore, the question that many are now asking is it only a matter of time before the war expands from the north to the south? And if the answer is yes, then where do the Palestinians go?
So the main answer is yes, it will go there. But just on your previous question regarding the numbers, I remind you that in the first week, Israel was accused of bombing a hospital with 500 people dead in that hospital, in that attack, if you remember. It was later found out that it was actually the Islamic Jihad who misfired the rocket that hit there, and also that probably the amount of casualties was 20 or 30. So therefore, again, we have to take all reports coming out of the Gaza Strip, because yes, the journalists are intimidated and are not allowed to report everything, and many of the workers of international aid organizations are not some Scandinavians who come there, but locals who are paid by UNRWA. So I beg also just to look at these numbers. Now, going south, of course we have to go south, because if we want to eradicate Hamas and if we want to find the hostages, who at least some of, if not all of them, already been taken to the south, then we have to go there. Gaza was much more fortified and a much more difficult war, and military experts have said that this was probably the most fortified city that was fought against in modern day history. I'm talking about the previous century and this century. And even the wars that went on, the US in Iraq and other places, the American military experts said that they have not encountered such a fortified city. So Gaza was the first stronghold where the headquarters were and had to be dealt with first. Since we have Hamas and we have hostages in the south, we have to go south. Now comes an interesting question. What do you do when you go south? We have asked the civilians to leave Gaza, so they go south. And now, if we look at the map, there are three options. One option is Egypt. Egypt has said, no way, we are not accepting them even temporarily. And rightfully so. They said that it'll create civil unrest in Egypt. We know that many places where we've seen big groups of Palestinians, if it's Lebanon or other places, there have been unrest. Egyptians are not interested even for a short while, because we know that there's nothing more long-term than temporary. The second option, which has been raised by some, is opening corridors into the southern corner of Israel by Gaza Strip and having setting up refugee camps there for a while. I don't think this will work either, because Palestinians are urged again not to leave, and many of them don't want to leave. So we're left with the question, how does the IDF operate with the large number of civilians in the southern areas, Khan Yunis, Rafah, etc.? And for that, I think that there needs to be a solution which creates safe havens, safe areas where these people can stay. Sadly, I'm saying sadly, but really Israel has no choice. There is another option, and that is Hamas, under world pressure, giving up arms, handing back the hostages, and you'll be surprised how quickly this whole conflict can end.
Okay, I'm glad you acknowledge that this is a very complex question to which there seems to be no answer at the moment. Where will the Palestinians go? Egypt refuses to take them. They can't go into southern Israel. On the third side is the Mediterranean Sea. I'm sure they can't jump into the Mediterranean Sea. They really have nowhere to go. Let me go back to Ambassador Trigunyat on this. Ambassador Trigunyat, where will the Palestinians go? Our Israeli guest acknowledges that they don't have an answer to this question. It's all very well to say the world should convince Hamas to, release the hostages, to stop the fighting, to surrender, and it'll all be over in no time, and, world peace will be restored. We're talking about utopia. That's not going to happen. So really, where does the answer lie? And also very quickly, the Israeli president said in an interview the other day that most of the 12,000 Palestinians who've been killed were terrorists. Is the world going to buy that?
Well, the fact remains is that this is a very old problem. This is an issue of Palestine. And until and unless that root cause is addressed, and I'm afraid that this will come back again. I mean, we have seen that Israel and Hamas or Gaza have had at least 4 wars until now. And every time that we have seen that these kind of wars have been far more insidious, and they continue to be there. And so when we have to, whenever the dust settles down, in a week, 10 days, 15 days, whenever the ceasefire is there, I think that one has to see that number one is the Hamas will have to change its philosophy. It has to recognize Israel. It has right of Israel to exist, or whichever government comes to power, and most likely they are planning to have the Palestinian Authority eventually rule it. But at the same time, till that particular issue, the international community and Israel must know the security efforts can contain it, but they are not a solution. There is no guarantee for safety and security of the Israelis. Do you know that we are talking of 1.5 million Israeli Gazans who are internally displaced, but then there are 500,000 Israelis also who are internally displaced. So it is not, the security is something comes when the two sides can live side by side in peace. Now, for that, obviously these kind of high-handed tactics, the terrorist tactics and disproportionate use of force, both have to stop, and that's absolutely important. And I think that they're benefactors of these Hamas or some others, these kind of groups must come to their sense as well. And of course, the Israeli government also needs to think whether what they are doing is the right solution or they are not multiplying the terror activities for future.
All right. And your thoughts on what the Israeli president has said about those 12,000, 13,000 Palestinians who've been killed in the last 6 weeks?
Well, this is a very sweeping statement, and I don't think the Israelis agree with that.
Okay, Itai Melchior, even the Israelis don't believe it. Forget about the international community buying what your president has said. You want to respond
And
to that?
5,000 children, can you imagine? I mean, they could be the terrorists, the small children.
Yeah, first of all, I think that nobody can accuse our president of being a warmonger. I remind you that the president was a former head of the Labour Party, the pro-peace party, the pro-two-state solution party, so he's certainly not a warmonger. And I think that for some reason the burden of proof always put on Israel is much higher. We said there's stuff happening in Shifa hospital, they said no. And then after the first entrance showed the guns, ammunition, and they said, no, this is for internal protection, even though I haven't seen any hospital with such armed-to-the-teeth guard force. And now we've found the tunnels and those bomb-proof doors and seen the videos of hostages there, and still the world doesn't believe. So I think that we have a very hard time to prove even things that we can prove, and this is something that, as the ambassador rightfully said, cannot be proved, and I don't think will ever be proved. I think the president is saying this also for our own ears, because we are trying, and again, many military experts from the West have called the Israeli army a very humane army. I remind you, I just earlier said that there's criticism in Israel while we are putting soldiers at risk and at the lives, for the lives of innocent Gazans, but also our soldiers are not there because they want to be. So that is a good question, and I think that Israel will always be blamed and held to a higher standard, which we try to keep anyway. So that's fair.
All right. I want to ask you about an interesting development, Mr. Melchior, that has taken place, which is that the leaders of the Arab world, a lot of Muslim majority countries, are gathering in Beijing for 2 days. They're hoping that they can get China to pressurize both Israel and the United States to call a ceasefire in Gaza. What do you make of that development?
Here we are entering a whole new world of geopolitics in the Middle East. And I remind you that the US tries to keep China out of the Gulf countries where it gets its oil, where it has allies and air bases. And meanwhile, some of those Gulf countries are moving closer to China. So this is actually a question to pose to US officials. But as an observer and someone who looks at what's going on in the Middle East, certainly it's a move to be expected. Remember that there are today more or less two axes in the world. One is the Western part, US, NATO, Australia, India, also part of different pacts with the West. And on the other side, we have Russia, Iran, China, and that is a very broad brush I'm painting here. But we have these two groups, and then we see that the Gulf countries, in a move that's been going on for around 3 or 4 years, are again getting back with Qatar, are re-establishing ties with Iran, are moving to China. So we certainly see, and I think that the Gulf countries are very good at knowing how to play both sides. And of course, they are also using this for their internal not struggle or conflict, but for their own relations with the US. When they don't get stuff they want from the US, they suddenly turn more towards China. And then surprisingly enough, they get what they want many times. So I think that that is also part of it. It's not really related to our conflict, because I don't really see China having a much influence. It is not a player in our neck of the woods today in the way it is in other areas. So I would look at this move more as something that is related to the bigger struggle and the use of those countries of that conflict to get what they want.
All right, Ambassador Trigunia, your thoughts on China playing the role that it is now, or at least is looking to play?
You know, as our friend said very clearly about the Chinese trying to expand their footprint in the region, and that is for sure. There's no doubt about it, because in the region there has been a feeling among all the Arab countries that United States is abdicating its responsibility or whatever it has agreed for providing security guarantees for them. And they found that they were not coming up to the mark. And therefore, they tried to look for the countries which are their markets, essentially now, because USA has, as far as oil is concerned, USA itself is the competitor. But so their Act East policy that these countries are following, especially the Gulf countries or the oil-rich countries towards China, India, Japan, and Korea, those are the major markets. So China is obviously now, after in last 10 years or so, it has created a very good environment for itself economically. It was not looking to get into the security dimension, but I remember the last several years, the Chinese government has been offering its own officers, or its good officers, so to say, after what they helped bridge the gap between the Saudis and the Iranians, that they are thinking that they could do so between the Palestine and Israel issue as well. And so, I mean, I think everybody tries their bit, but they have not been successful as far as the Russia-Ukraine war is concerned. We have seen it. So these are complicated matters. And I have a feeling that only country that can really play the role for any other thing, as far as Israel is concerned, is the United States of America. And as I said, that eventually, once this Hamas is decimated to a great extent, I doubt very much if they'll be able to fully destroy them. But if it's decimated, and the political Hamas will be there, which is sitting in Qatar at the moment. And so they are negotiating all these releases and everything, hostage release. So if that happens, and there is some kind of an understanding on both sides that let us give it a shot and see that whether two countries can live side by side, I think then it will require the whole of the United Security Council, in which China is very much there, Russia is very much there. So they derive their strength from that and their goodwill that they have created. I mean, it's surprisingly, you will know that as far as BRI is concerned, Belt and Road Initiative, from Tehran to Tel Aviv, China is present everywhere in the region.
There is no doubt about that. And also, I think it signals, a shifting geopolitics here. We've seen this great power rivalry already playing out between the United States and China over multiple issues for a very long time now. Ties between the two countries have been strained. Presidents Xi and Biden met just the other day in California, and barely a few hours after they agreed to sort of improve ties, Biden ends up calling Xi a dictator. So let me go back to Itai Melchior at this point. Itai Melchior, is this really a great power rivalry playing out, you think, at some level? Because what's interesting is that it's not just Beijing which is trying to play a big role here, with the Arab world and Muslim countries' leaders gathering in Beijing over the next 2 days. Russia has announced that they too could be holding some sort of a conference or meeting of regional leaders to discuss the Gaza violence. And we've seen how Russia and China have increasingly aligned themselves with each other in recent times, especially since the Russia-Ukraine war.
Yes, so as I said, both Russia and China are more or less now on the same broad side, if we divide the world roughly. And certainly Russia is a much more active player in the region, because remember that besides the fact that they have bases in the region, they have bases in Syria, they were the ones to support the Assad regime and actually help it overcome the internal conflict, or overcome to the extent that they have overcome. But they have a big presence here. By the way, they also had quite a significant number of the hostages with the dual citizenship having Russian citizenship, and also quite a lot of Russians in Gaza. And I think they were actually one of the best groups that got to leave Gaza Strip of foreign citizens was the Russians. So the Russians are a much more influential player in the region, even though they're not a superpower like China. And therefore, of course, they are well listened to. Remember that we are speaking about Gaza, but we also have a front in the north. The front in the north is twofold. Of course, Lebanon is where Hezbollah lives and threatens us from. But we've had rockets fired at us from Syria many times. It's Hezbollah, Hamas.
Okay, we seem to have lost the line there to Itai Melchior. So let me take this question to Ambassador Trigunyad. Ambassador Trigunyad, do you really see countries like China and Russia being able to put considerable pressure on the United States and Israel in this situation, given that both are on record as saying no question of a ceasefire at this point?
Well, I think that recently the Xi-Biden summit, I believe that they are trying to work some kind how to manage responsibly the global issues. And they did discuss Israel-Hamas war. And I don't know if there was an understanding reached, because immediately after that meeting, the Chinese have started, organizing this meeting with the Arab foreign ministers. And the fact that all the Arab foreign minister and Islamic countries reached Beijing also speaks for itself. Secondly, Russia, obviously, as Mr. Shimmer was saying, that, that they are very important now. They have got back into the region, and they have, whether under the OPEC or whether by their presence in Syria, they are an influential player. But I doubt very much that between these two countries, they can influence Israel. It's because Israel, the only country that has a hold over Israel today, or has always had, because they continue to support Israel, is the United States of America. And if USA is on board with this kind of de-escalation and ceasefire and all, I think that it will come through. And I'm feeling that within a few days' time or a week's time, we will see a longish kind of pauses followed by some kind of a ceasefire.
All right. So this is the question, Mr. Melchior. There is growing pressure, as we've discussed, on Israel to call a ceasefire. How much longer do you think it's going to be before we actually see something like that happening? The Israeli ambassador to the United States has already said on record that a deal may be in the offing and some more hostages are likely to be released very soon. Not all 240, but some. We don't, of course, know what the terms of that deal might be, whether it will be in exchange for the release of Palestinian prisoners in Israel. But the question really is, what do you think can really set the ball rolling towards the ceasefire? I mean, if you're going to ask for Hamas to surrender, that's obviously talking about utopia. We don't really see that happening.
Yes. Of course, there's talks about a hostage deal, which will include a certain temporary ceasefire of 3 to 5 days. That's at least what Hamas is asking for. And I believe that even though there are strong voices and a big opposition in Israel to any ceasefire, in such a case, we will see a ceasefire to return a large amount of hostages. And so that's one option. Besides that, I don't see Israel stopping. As we said, Israel had set out 2 or 3 goals for this affair. And until they are met, or until the world pressure amounts to something which is totally impossible to withstand, I don't see a normal ceasefire entering the scene.
All right. You do not see a normal ceasefire anytime soon, but I still want to ask you again. You know, you said something interesting earlier. You said that the Israeli government seems to be under fire from all quarters. There are Israelis back home who believe that the Israeli government's response to the 7th October massacre hasn't been strong enough. Of course, not to mention the anger with the Netanyahu government over the failure to prevent these attacks in the first place. And then there is now this growing anger around the world with the Palestinian killings rising. So I'm going to ask you this again. Do you really believe that this international pressure is not a factor at all in Israel's decision making?
It's certainly a factor, and it's a very delicate balancing act that is actually taking place. For example, let's take the fact that Israel has allowed diesel and fuels into Gaza, met by strong criticism from even inside the cabinet and certainly in the public. People saying, well, we can't give anything humanitarian if we are not getting anything humanitarian. So on one side, and of course, then you try and think, well, so why did the government do that? So yes, they also say that they need the water pumps working to prevent disease, and there needs to be some drinking water and some operations that need to happen. But also, I think that the reason that the government did go along to this, knowing it is going to put a strain on the coalition and on the government, and get some anger in the public, is the fact that doing these humanitarian steps will allow a longer window of opportunity and reduce the international power. So it's certainly a factor, and I think that we're going to keep seeing this delicate act of giving some concessions, of maybe a small ceasefire for a few hours for humanitarian reasons, or other things which are going to be happening just because of the thought of what is happening in the world opinion.
If you recall, a few days ago, Israel had in fact agreed to 4 hours of humanitarian pauses in the fighting every day, and this deal was brokered by the United States. That's not held, has it?
Well, that window was specifically to allow Gazans to leave Gaza. I think that one of the problems there was that when Israel announced to the citizens of Gaza, leave Gaza, many didn't take it seriously, because previously, in previous rounds of fighting, Israeli army did not go deep into Gaza, which, as we said, is a very fortified area. And this hasn't happened for many, many years, actually, and most of them just did not believe it's going to happen, combined with the threat and warning of Hamas, do not leave. And I think that when they actually started seeing the tanks in their own eyes, because again, the media inside Gaza does not show that. If you see the stories that are being told internally in Gaza about the brave fighting of Hamas and how they're fending off Israel, then the citizens were not aware. And I think that once there grew a panic and people wanted to leave in the masses, there was no other way than to allow this humanitarian corridor, few hours a day, that people could actually just leave in a safe route. Again, we know for a fact that this has been exploited also for some Hamas terrorists to go along with that flow. There's no way to stop that. And again, it's a price Israel was willing to pay, both to save innocent lives and also, again, to show the world that it is doing its utmost under circumstances to keep civilian lives safe.
Ambassador Triguniat, last word to you. Israel is doing its utmost to keep civilian lives safe. Again, is the world buying that?
Well, I think that, this is what the IDF says. And I must say one thing, that whenever the professional forces fight, they are the guerrilla warfare, they are always at a disadvantage. I mean, it is never easy for the professional forces to fight the guerrillas. We have had experience ourselves in Sri Lanka and all, you know that. And so I think that it's very difficult to judge whether to what extent are they saving the civilian lives or not. But the numbers, if they keep on increasing, they will defy that logic also. Let me tell you that in the beginning, when the attacks, the October 7th terror attacks took place, 99% of the world had great sympathy for Israel immediately. But thereafter, the bombings that continued very often indiscriminately all over for many days, and now 46 days. So that's why the focus of the world changed into a very different direction. And that's why the more and more, the views and the visuals that are coming out are asking for ceasefire, especially on the humanitarian grounds.
All right, that's all the time we have on this show. Itai Melchior and Ambassador Anil Trigunia, thank you so much. As always, a pleasure talking to the two of you, and I look forward to having you back on Global Lens, because clearly this war is not ending anytime soon.
Thank you.
Well, that's it on Global Lens tonight. If you have been, thanks so much for watching. Do join us again at the same time tomorrow. Good night.
ChatGPT. It can generate codes and human-like responses through text, write stories,